Welcome to Talking Infrastructure, the podcast brought to you by global infrastructure consultancy AECOM. In this series, we'll be discussing the hot topics, key projects, and innovations that are helping to solve some of the world's most complex infrastructure challenges. Hello and welcome to a very special episode of AECOM's Talking Infrastructure podcast, recorded live at the Atomium in Brussels. After what has been an epic, almost 400 kilometre bike ride. Some of us might have done a bit more than that, looking at some of the diversions people took along the way from London to Brussels with a group of incredible people who are in front of me right now. I'll probably give a quick shout out. Now, before we release you all to go home, we thought it would be great to end this bike ride, this ongoing conversation with a panel discussion, looking at, well, how can we take away some of the conversations that we've been having over the last couple of days as we've been pedaling, as we've maybe had a beer, maybe had a conversation, maybe stood on a soapbox. How can we take those conversations away, the enthusiasm this group of people has in tackling climate change, focusing on the energy transition and looking at a greener way of transportation. So look, joining me on the panel today, we have got Andrew Griffiths, Director of Policy and Partnerships at PlanetMark. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you.
Lars Verkerk, Strategic Alliance Manager from Johnson Controls. Welcome, Lars. Miet, is that right? Almost. Oh, okay. AECOM's Program Management Director for Benelux.
Hello.
And Ajai Ahluwalia, Head of Supply Chain for Renewables UK.
Hello.
Can we give them a quick round of applause? Now, before we really get into things, let's have a little bit of a chat about the bike ride. And Lars, for those of you who are listening to the podcast, well, you can see that Lars is dressed, you can't see, but Lars is dressed very smartly and the rest of us are dressed in Luyckx. So Lars, we will come back to you on your thoughts on the bike ride in a minute. But Miet, I'm going to start with you. You joined the bike ride today. What's going to be your takeaway memory of cycling with these amazing people?
I would say a lot of energy and a big combination of energy. There was wind energy, solar energy, kinetic energy, but also the energy of the group. You really felt the drive. And I think that is a little bit what it's about, the energy transition, that we need to make sure that engagement is there and it starts small and we need to make sure that we grow it bigger.
Great. Ajai, what do you think? What's your takeaway?
I'm just going to brag about the fact this is my third time, but no, I like the other times. I'm humbled, actually. I'm humbled to be surrounded by such amazing people who are just trying to do something good. Maybe they work in sustainability, maybe they don't. Maybe it's their first multi-day ride, maybe it's not. But just trying to talk to everyone who did the ride, and I'm just it's just a pleasure to be in such good company.
Andrew.
It's been a 4-day conversation. It's been a 4-day panel discussion. And the irony is that kind of everyone in this room should be on stage doing the panel discussion as well. We've had so many interesting discussions on the ride. And I think realizing, how fast it was actually to get to Brussels by bike opens your mind to the different ways that we can approach traveling. And then doing it with others, doing it in community, the opportunity to have conversations, really interesting conversations along the way, just made the time fly, where we were spending lots of time cycling, but also it was social the entire way, which was just magnificent.
Lars, what do you make of it? If we did it again next year?
Well, first of all, I would love to be part of that one. I've been taking a look as well on all the documentaries on the Ride of Change, and you've done some fantastic job in the past 10 years. Building a community of change makers is really something I think starts with these kind of conversations. And I'm really excited in what shape or form it will take to be part of it going forward.
Fantastic. So today's discussion was really focused on, I think, to start with, a sort of people-centric approach to the energy transition, which sounds terribly formal when we're sat like we are right now. But really, how do we collaborate, How do we bring people together? How do we take people on that journey with us? And how do we communicate so that people understand not only the challenges of the energy transition, but also the benefits of where we're heading? Andrew, can I start with you? What do you think, apart from events like this, how do we promote the benefits to people? How do we get people to really understand? I mean, we're sat up here looking down in Brussels, and there are lots of people around there that need to, we'd love to better communicate to. How do we start to promote those benefits?
So I think it's stories. I think that's one of the wonderful things that we've experienced over the last 4 days is that Ride the Change is itself a story. It's a story that we will all go away and tell to everyone that we know, friends and family, about what we experienced, the conversations we had. But then as we're going, we're all telling stories as well and hearing kind of really inspirational things of hearing from Siemens about how they're taking things from 3.5 megawatt wind turbines through to thinking about how do we get to 40 or 50 megawatt wind turbines. And I think it's safe to say, as we've been coming down through the Netherlands and into Belgium, wind turbines have been a bit of a theme, haven't they?
Seen a few.
Seen a lot, in fact. And I think helping people to visualize a clear picture of what does a net zero future look like, and what does it feel like to live in that world. And I think we had like a little taster of that as we were coming through, of seeing kind of this harmony between nature all around us. We were in beautiful countryside along wonderful coastlines and, dotted by these wind turbines that are generating the energy that is driving everything that we're using. It was driving all the energy and electricity that we were consuming when we were in our hotels and hostels. And so I think, we need to take these kinds of examples where people can see really clearly, look how amazing this is. Look how much energy this is generating already now. And then kind of extrapolate that into a future in which the entire planet looks like that, feels like that, and creates a world where you're not, choking on the sort of toxic emissions coming out the back of tailpipes as you're driving through cities. But instead, as we've experienced the more into the countryside we got, it was refreshing. It was energizing. It gave you much more fuel to travel further, travel faster. So I think we need to look ahead and come up with a compelling story for what that world looks like and feels like.
Lars, it's about stories, but how do we make sure that we communicate the challenges to people without scaring them away?
Well, there's two things actually. To not scare people away, you want to be very clear what it means for them. Right? So open communications about the choices which needs to be made if we want to move ahead in this transition. How we make it accessible for everyone. Because there are some differences, especially in the regions across the world, on the availability on resources, support, infrastructure. So one of the biggest challenges I see that people have at the moment is basically asking themselves, where do I begin? Mm-hmm. I know that it's important. I know that I want to do something. But what can I do? So to help shape that story and help give approachable solutions and make it also relatable to their situation is something we still have a lot of work to do. But this is also not something we can do alone. So normally, and I'm really honored to do so, is we need to bring together the knowledge holders and the organizations who can make the change work in the end.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Now, it's of course important to us that we're creating the content and discussing the topics that matter to you. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please take a minute to fill out our survey, the link to which you can find in the show notes. You could even win a Talking Infrastructure mug for your troubles. Thank you for listening. Now back to the episode. Miet, if I come to you next, just talking then about collaboration. I mean, it goes without saying, obviously it's hugely important, but how do we promote that? And how do we make sure that we are having that conversation together? Because we're only going to achieve these things if we have collaboration, if we have those cross-industry, cross-sector conversations. Are we getting it right? Are we moving together as one, or are we heading off in different directions?
Well, I think it's a very complex challenge that needs an approach from different kind of angles. I think, we will not make it without collaboration. I mean, the energy transition is very complex. So we need to make sure that we bring a lot of different knowledge areas and competences together. It's also not something that stops at the border. So therefore also it's very important that we collaborate. And I think that, this event is really, a collaboration within the different teams. I think within AECOM, we also try to, everybody knows our slogan to build a better world together. It's also by bringing the different resources. But I think it's also, if we then talk about resources, that is also a challenge that we are faced with the fact that there is a scarcity in those resources. So again, there it's very important to make sure that we have that collaboration. So I mean, there is no other way, I think, but it's like the different elements that need to be brought to the table, and then together we will make it.
Ajai, you see you're wanting to come in maybe there on that.
Yeah, thanks, James. And I think what I'd build upon there is sort of my own area of expertise, which is sort of wind power and energy systems. I think, for example, we talk about the decarbonisation of the UK's energy system, and I can quote, terawatt hours or gigawatts of ambition that the UK government has as an example, and the EU has also. But actually, there's different ways of achieving that. For example, a way to achieve that is to make sure that through the wind turbines that we're manufacturing, let's make sure we have those recyclable blades. Let's make sure that the steel that is used to make those towers or those foundations are made out of green steel. Green steel that's either created through electric arc furnaces, which themselves are sort of powered by renewable energy, or that are used that are using hydrogen or green hydrogen that again comes from renewable sources. So let's see that vision come about, but through a green way that actually utilizes one of the greatest resources that we have around Europe, which is the wind.
What are the biggest challenges that we're facing? Because cycling through, and Andrew, you mentioned the amount of wind turbines we're seeing. I took photos of the first few, which looked quite good, and then I must confess I got bored of seeing them. But it's amazing. It's amazing. So are we on the right direction? Are we positive? Ajai, back to you.
Yeah, so if I use the sort of transitional, particularly with regards to the energy system, people often talk about 3 or 4 things. The first thing is planning. I mean, we, of course, many of us know, and hopefully some of the listeners on the podcast will be familiar with how many of our respective countries have good planning rules in place. Planning rules are there to make sure that we don't just do things without consideration for impact on the environment. But at the same time, we have to be pragmatic about how we are in a climate emergency, and we need to see some of these things happen in a much larger way. So planning is obviously one of them. Grid connections are another. The UK is not alone in the fact that its grid connections are not, and its grid infrastructure is not suitable for the intermittent renewables that we need to include. And then we can have conversations about storage and how that factors in as well. The third thing is the area that I've moved in. So I came very much from a technical space where I was designing and building offshore wind farms, and I was quite interested in supply chain. Supply chain is super important because that can help many countries improve their financial and economies by actually seeing a green industrial revolution happening through some of the things I described before. And the fourth thing is people. You talked about resources. One of the biggest resources that we sometimes forget about is people power. Do we have the skills? Do we have the competence? Do we have the experience to do things we need to do?
Lars? Skills?
Yes.
Yes.
And I'll give you a good example of what we do to actually help nurture the skills of the future in the end. So just across the border in the Netherlands, we are part of something called PPS Skill. And that's something where we help educate over 3,000 students every single year in the technical industry to help understand what are heat pumps, how do you decarbonize a building, and really lay the foundation to become the engineers and the designers of the future. Last week, we've done the same also with even the preschools and the high schools following up. to also get more people interested in the technical field to help solve these kind of challenges. Because if we don't have the people power, we will not be able to solve a lot of the critical issues we face at the moment. So we're really pushing forward to make that happen. And to put it in perspective, if you take a look at the Netherlands, those 3,000 students equates to about 8% of the students in the country. And it's the vast majority of the students in the technical skills. It's a very successful program. So we're also exploring, can we roll this out to different regions? And it's not that they all come work on our companies. We do this usually and bring either partners in or small SMEs. Because innovation and actually the next generation of engineers and technical skilled people is something which will benefit us all. And there are going to be some challenges still, especially in the long-term outlook. What you see is that more and more people are sadly still leaving the industry than there are joining. And that means that we need to start working differently than the traditional we do everything mindset. You see quite a lot still around. So what you see is that due to the scale and the complexity of the decarbonization challenges currently faced, is that you need to take a look at the core experience of stakeholders and also the partners you can bring to fill those gaps. What you'll see in the end is that you'll do it more efficiently, because everyone does what they're good at. Secondly, it creates a very healthy relationship because you jointly want to tackle these kind of challenges and maybe you figure something out which you can reproduce. And thirdly, knowing that there's all these kind of different experts helping you on your decarbonization journey, me myself as a client would be really happy about. So we have the right skills. We need to work how to collaborate. And we also need to be able to share that knowledge with each other to really be successful in the long run.
So what we need to do is bottle up the people in this room, the energy in this room, and be able to export it to everybody. Is that right, Andrew? Is that a new side hustle for you? Bottling up some ride the change energy?
If we can find a way to bottle that energy, I think it'd be immensely renewable. At least as long as we have enough snack bars and Tony's Chocolonely, which has been a theme of the weekend, hasn't it? But I think it's, we have to give people examples of what good looks like. So one example of this, one of PlanetMark certify Scottish Power Energy Networks. And for COP26 in Glasgow, they developed a kind of net zero concept electricity substation, which does, it's not the sexiest case study to many members of the public, but to those in the world of kind of, national grid and all of that kind of thing, it was a really interesting concept and idea to kind of come up with. And most people didn't realize that this net zero substation was right between the green zone and the blue zone. You absolutely walked past it if you were in Glasgow for COP26 and you just won't have known. But they looked into absolutely everything they could do. They looked at the materials that they used to build it. They looked at the coolant gases that they would be using to cool systems down. They looked at how it would be kind of monitor and manage electricity in a smart and dynamic way so there wasn't wastage. So all of those different elements and kind of packaging that up into something that others in the industry and others within their own organization can learn from and go, right, how much of this can we implement everywhere in the next 5 years? And I think that's where we need to get much better at being very open and candid about what's working and what's not, right? And that's hard to do sometimes because the what's working bit, people sometimes feel is a competitive advantage that they don't want to let go of. And then the what's not working feels like a competitive disadvantage because you might look like you were a fool. Now, we have to get past this when it comes to climate action because there is no competitive advantage on a dead planet. Well, the planet's going to be fine, let's be clear. It's the human species that's in trouble. But how do we, unlock this ability where I think Elon Musk shared a story of, if we're all on a sinking boat and it's got lots of holes in it and you invent the patch kit that, blocks up the holes in the boat, don't hoard it and try and make lots of money by selling it to everyone. Tell everyone else how to make them because you're still on a sinking boat. You might be the richest person on it by the time it goes down, but you will still sink. And so I think we need that mentality of collaboration comes with sharing. And we have to share what works and, just as importantly, what doesn't work, so that we accelerate everyone else on their own journeys, so that we all ultimately together move faster toward our objective, that vision of the future that I mentioned earlier, that we need to kind of be really clear on and have that shared sense of what we're progressing towards.
Hi, it's Nathan from UK Reef. If you're enjoying this podcast, then why not attend our annual event, which is taking place in Leeds this coming May. We'll be bringing together the whole real estate and infrastructure industry with key players from public sector, end users, government, and a whole range of developers and investors across the industry, alongside the wider built environment. With all the key players, influencers, government ministers, and decision makers set to be in attendance, with a very client-heavy audience. And whilst you're there, you can also watch AECOM's Talking Infrastructure podcast, which is being recorded live at UK Reef. Make sure that you've got your ticket by registering at www.ukreef.com.
So let's go from sinking ship to excitement for the future. Let's be a bit more positive. Miet, I'm looking at you down the end there. What excites you about the future? What do you think is going to be not only the challenges, but maybe some of the solutions that are coming, and looking at how people are becoming more engaged and how industries are coming together?
Well, I mean, I think there was always a lot to learn from the past. We already had the Industrial Revolution. We went from gas to electricity. We saw the internet. So, I believe that we are in a similar transition for the moment. And I believe that we will, that it will come out fine in the end. But there will be some pitfalls and some painful points still to take along. So I think, we need to make sure that as an organization that we are prepared for that. We need to make sure that, there is resilience within our teams, within our worlds, within our society. We need to have proper politicians who want to, take the bold decisions.
I'll come to them in a minute.
On that one, just on the previous point, if I can, on that one, I think what is very important and is a challenge, what we really need to focus on is the communication, the miscommunication that is there, and really, explaining what the impact is of the climate change, what the challenges are, to make sure that everybody understands what we are heading for the moment. So I think if all this gets solved, I'm positive.
What excites me?
Apart from cycling to Brussels with your music blaring.
I'll talk about that later. Do you know what? One of the things that excites me is the fact that the technology is an issue. So, many engineers are on the ride, and that's great. But you can ask any of them, and when it comes to the decarbonisation of the energy system, not just in the UK but many, this is a huge thing to say. There's no revolutionary technology that is going to be created that can't help us get to where we are today. Point I'm trying to make is that the technology is there. The turbines, yes, they're getting bigger, and that reduces the cost of them. Different voltage levels in transmission systems, great, but we simply have routes to improve upon a concept that is already established. There's no magical technology that needs to be created. We're there. It's just the political will and the policies that are a function of that to implement and create those concepts, which means that we can install these things, and that's something we should be super excited about. Not to mention the fact that in developing and creating these things, we can see a rejuvenation of our manufacturing sectors within Europe and indeed the UK. And that's very exciting from a job creation perspective. We can see so many opportunities for our respective countries that can help not just solve the problem of climate change, but actually see a much better country as well.
We were discussing this on the ferry, weren't we? Talking about, well, actually, a lot of our respective home countries are looking for economic injections. They're looking for creating the draw for skills, investment in skills, looking for jobs, looking for getting money into the economy. Well, actually, surely the energy transition is a golden opportunity. Who wants to tackle politicians then? It's the year of the vote.
I can have a crack.
You to it, Lars. You come to you in a second.
So I last week as an Earth Day fireside chat event, I interviewed Alistair Campbell. And it was really interesting. He just published a book recently called "But What Can I Do?" Which is all about what can you do? How do you kind of enact change within our society? And his argument, unsurprisingly, is that we need more people engaged in politics. And there are some really simple things that we can do that are used around the world to do that. So things like removing the need for voter ID, which is well known to be a tool to try and stop people voting. Lowering the voting age is another one of the things that he talked about. If we're going to be serious about protecting the future for young people, why should the voting age not be 16? And if the answer to that question is because you don't trust 16-year-olds to make good decisions, then how are we educating our 16-year-olds and younger about politics? Because at the moment, unless you study politics at A-levels, you don't learn about it. And so I think those ones. And then the third one is mandatory voting, which many countries have, like Australia. And what that achieves is it forces politicians to actually consider the needs of every single one of their citizens, because all of them are going to vote. Whereas at the moment we exist in a system where the politicians are strategically adopting policies purely for those that they think might turn up to the polls. And that tends to mean that they are skewed in their kind of, they're skewed in their kind of lean towards particular kind of demographics of society, particular age groups in society, and discount the need to have policies and manifesto commitments that actually meet the needs of a huge swathe of the population who don't vote. Australia has mandatory voting and their turnouts are insane. They're not 100%, but it's huge. And they have a whole ethos around it where they have they vote on a Saturday, which makes more sense because we can all make it. It's not a working day. And when you turn up to vote, you get a democracy sausage, where they have hot dogs on the go for everyone who comes and votes, which I really like. As long as there's vegan and vegetarian options, I'm all in for democracy sausages.
Lars, a sausage is the answer.
I wish it was that simple. No, but there is also a counterpart. The willingness to make this change at the moment actually started with the change in policies. Because a lot of legislation has changed over the past 10 years. You see direct consequences for a lot of the large real estate owners. So that they need to start making decarbonization strategies and they actually need to start taking action. So we tend to sometimes focus only on the things which can be done better. And like everyone, there can be done better a lot. But there also has been some very positive change because of a lot of the policies which have been set in place. Are they all golden and ironclad? Probably not. As technology evolve and more resources become accessible, they will probably still need a lot of differentiation. But what I do think is that the communication front needs some improvement.
I mean, I would obviously agree that communications is key. Yeah.
So for those who know me personally, you'll know that I am quite political, but I'd like to sort of make a point, but in a slightly different way, which is that actually, firstly, let's recognize it's the biggest, I think, election year ever, where in democracies across the world, we'll see the greatest number of people voting ever. And I think that's really important because so many different countries are going to the polls and people are creating manifestos of which climate change is clearly and hopefully will be a large part of it. But the thing that I want to raise is the topic of climate change and decarbonization of energy systems, for example, as a function of that, and say, I'd actually like facts and evidence to demonstrate that these things aren't political. It's just the way that perhaps parties might differ in their approach to creating a solution that is practical. That is one of my greatest hopes, is that as a planet, we realize that this shouldn't be a political football. This is a topic that is real. It's very, very important to us and our families and our future generations, that actually it's more about how do we achieve, what do we need to do, and how do we get there? So I would hope, unlike in some countries, for example in the States, that actually we can depoliticize the issue of climate change.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Now, it's of course important to us that we're creating the content and discussing the topics that matter to you. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please take a minute to fill out our survey, the link to which you can find in the show notes. You could even win a Talking Infrastructure mug for your troubles. Thank you for listening. Now back to the episode. You mentioned there about strategy, and we've talked a little bit about that sort of long-term vision. And I think exactly as you say, if it's a political hot potato and it's being passed around and there's no long-term view and no long-term strategy, then we're never going to achieve what we need to, or not in an efficient way anyway. Miet, what's your thoughts on where we are in terms of understanding where we need to go in the future? Have we got a strategy? Have we got a long-term vision?
Well, I don't think we have as a society. I mean, I touched upon it already a little bit in the beginning. I mean, this problem doesn't stop at the border, and we really need to go for an holistic approach to really be able to drive change. I think one thing that is missing, if we go back to the politics, is the total cost of ownership. I think very often this piece is forgotten when decisions are taken, or when the challenges are explained to people. It's often only half of a story. I mean, I do believe that the politics, or whoever who drives decisions in a country, are very important, because we have seen in the past that it's through those decisions that you're able to make the change, and it's also those clear decisions that are needed for investors to be willing to invest in this energy transition. Well, I think, we need to keep on believing in it. I think we need to be aware that most of us are engineers, and we tend to approach this matter from an engineering point of view. But we need to also understand that some people think different and, think along in their way to tell the story and to convince them that this is actually happening, and that we really need to do something to it, and then we need to reach our politics to convey the same message, and then I think we will make it. But well, my glass is always half full, but I think we still have some steps to take. Yeah.
Lars, you look like you want to jump in there.
Yeah, I don't think it's no longer the question if, but it's more the question how. And it seems to me, but most of the engineers are very familiar with solving the how. And also be aware that a lot of the technology which is needed to decarbonize at least the built environment, which is about 40% of our CO2 emissions, already exists today. The biggest challenge, though, is understanding the context of the built environment which has already been built. Because the majority of the buildings, which will be around in 2050, exists now. And I sometimes call it the world is getting a little bit upside down from traditional company relationships. Because traditional route of solving these kind of challenges is you start with the designing, the engineering, the consulting phase, you go all the way down into the general contractor and eventually the manufacturer. Company I work for, we've been in the buildings for over 40, 50 years. So we know how those buildings operate. We know where the biggest energy leakages are. But sharing this knowledge with the engineers who are now solving the how is kind of or has been for many, many years, the missing link, which helps drive direction, which helps tell people, what can I do? What kind of investments do I need to do if I want to take action? And what are then the consequences in the long runs on the decisions I make on that roadmap? So I'm a bit more optimistic. People do want to solve it. Majority of the people you talk to are really keen and they are aware what the topic is. 15 years ago, I don't think we could have imagined we would be sitting in probably this panel with the same kind of topics all the time. So I'm really excited to see that momentum starting. But bringing the right solutions to the table, make it available to the engineers who are solving the how is going to be the biggest step forward.
Let's pause on that a second. And so, where are we getting it right? Where are the areas? Where are the industries or sectors that and if we look at focus on the collaboration piece, where are we getting it right?
Offshore wind.
Yeah.
Was that a good intro? I can talk about other things, but I think offshore wind is a fantastic example. And the UK is driving the way, thanks for the sort of European supply chain where we see turbines being manufactured in Denmark, Germany, France, as well as the electrical equipment across Europe as well. So I think we've got this. I'm going to make it about supply chain for a little bit, forgive me. But we have this fantastic supply chain across Europe and the UK, which can be expanded to create things like offshore wind turbines and the electrical systems that connect them to the grid. With good policy, for example, let's take the 2008 Climate Change Act that came in under the last Labour government. That was the catalyst to start things, but then the coalition government brought in a support mechanism called the Contract for Difference, of which many countries across the world have emulated. It's creating that long-term value proposition that allows billions of euros, pounds, etc., to be invested. That's what private sector needs, is certainty in investment and a sort of knowledge that they'll get a return on that. So it comes back to policy that has been seen in the UK as well as the European Union that enables these multi-billion-pound investments to be made, and more importantly, to see these things installed which directly reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that's being produced.
I think I agree. I think the energy system in the whole has so far been quite one of the kind of leading industries and one of the success stories. Certainly the greatest contribution to decarbonisation of the UK has been the decarbonisation of our energy system, in large part due to the transition far more rapid than anyone could have predicted from coal to gas. That actually was triggered by a policy that put a price on coal, and it was accidental that price just happened to be at the perfect point that made coal essentially uneconomical. It made it so that you would have to spend money to burn coal in comparison to gas. And lo and behold, then private industry moved way faster than anyone could have predicted to transition us more onto a gas model. So I think we're seeing that, and there's this kind of transition kind of rippling out. I think we're seeing an acceleration, the likes of which is hard to kind of think about in living memory. Certainly for me, where, in 2023, China installed more solar capacity than the US did in its entire history so far. That is crazy in terms of the level, the volume of manufacturing getting up to sort of address this challenge now, so that we can answer the question, where are these solutions going to come from? So I think if we can, double down on the technologies, like we say, we know some of these technologies that work. I think personally, we need to move there's still quite a lot of money being bet on fantastical technologies, getting us, carbon capture and storage and things, 20 billion put on that by the UK government. I'd like, yes, we need to invest in that, but don't ease off on the renewable technologies that we know work. We know exactly how much they'll decarbonize, and we know we can get them in a short period of time, rather than rolling the dice on something that is a bet. So I think we know what works. We need to kind of accelerate those things that work and help people to continue innovating within those things, so we get better. It gets cheaper, it gets more effective, and ultimately becomes more and more a viable solution. So that a big key policy that I would certainly look for is the uncoupling of the electricity price from gas. Because at the moment, people don't realize that it's gas that is causing the price to be higher. And actually, if people started getting cheaper energy on renewable tariffs because they were using electricity rather than gas, that's going to flip in everyone's minds to go, how could I switch to a heat pump so that I'm not burning gas, which is way more expensive for me? those sorts of kind of simple policy decisions, I think, can drive an acceleration.
Want more insights from infrastructure industry experts? Check out our latest Future of Infrastructure Global Research Report. In it, we explore one of the most complex, important shifts happening across the world today, the energy transition, and what it means for you. We surveyed nearly 850 senior executives and interviewed public and private sector leaders to find practical, profitable, predictable, and people-centric pathways to net zero. To explore the research, please visit infrastructure.aecom.com. Thank you for listening. Now back to the episode.
But also, doesn't that come back to the point around communications and educating people and bringing the knowledge levels up? So how do we do that hand in hand? Because as you rightly pointed out, politicians often will create policies to get voted in. So if they're getting the pressure from people who are better informed, then surely we're getting there. So how do we? Am I doing people a disservice? Do you think most people on the street really understand what we're trying to achieve?
I think there is a counter argument to that, which is that there's a slight dichotomy in what I'm trying to say, so I'll try to explain it. And I've had this conversation with many people on the ride as well. One is that in order to get to where we need to go, is there a question as to whether or not every person needs to be a passionate climate change advocate? Often we find that if we have a product or a service which is cheaper, higher quality, then the masses will adopt that. It doesn't matter perhaps where it's sourced and how ethical the product is. That's just human behavior or human nature. But by the same time, that usually happens because policies have been put in place. And policies are put in place by governments and politicians, and often those politicians get based on their manifestos, in which case you go back to square one, which is we need a well-informed electorate to vote in people who can implement good policies. So that's where I've got to in my thinking, and then I get stuck.
Before we wrap up, what's the one piece of advice that you'd give maybe this audience, but also the audience listening to the podcast, about creating a sense of a momentum around this? What's the one piece of advice that you would give people? Lars, you look like you've got a piece of advice.
Dare to share.
Share.
Yeah. Can be knowledge, can be experiences. So we can really focus on how to do this efficiently at scale.
Miet, any advice?
Yeah, and I think maybe to build on that is don't think that everybody knows what you know. Because I think that is often something, that I tend to do when you speak to somebody, assuming that they know, but often they don't know. And I always find it interesting if you then talk about a relevant topic to you that person maybe didn't know, and also the other way around. And I think that's how we can, bring the engagement and spread the fire.
Ajai?
Two elements. One, don't give up. We have to be persistent and committed to what we're trying to achieve. And the second one is you're not alone. So even if you're, at your desk on a late evening and you think you're trying to do something right, and you can see how it might impact things, there are lots of other people in the same shoes, and that's why Ride the Change is also good, because you get to meet all those people in person.
Great. Andrew?
Social tipping points are closer than you think. We talk a lot about kind of the biophysical tipping points that we're kind of afraid of within kind of the global ecosystem. But social tipping points, the data shows us that if you only need 25% of a population to agree on something for it to become a social norm that then ripples its way through the rest of society. You only need 3% of a population to actively push, to be out on the streets protesting. There's never been a case in human history where 3% of a population actively push for something, whether it be women getting the vote, whether it be sort of the end of apartheid. There's never been an instance in human history where they didn't get what they wanted. And that number gets even lower to more like around 1% if you have influential people and leaders in that mix of people pushing. And so, being strategic in what we're doing, we don't have to convince and get 50% of the population on the streets to make this happen. The social tipping points are much closer than that. And that to me feels incredibly achievable.
Positive note to end on. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please give our panel a warm Now, if you enjoyed this podcast, then please like, subscribe, leave a review and share, obviously. Tell your friends. And of course, feel free to plug it on social media. I'll be back soon with the next episode of Talking Infrastructure. Until then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.